She wasn't supposed to be alive. A half-starved German shepherd pup, one eye swollen shut, dragged from a shallow grave beneath the Oregon sand, by the hands of four Marines who were never meant to be there. No barking, no struggle, just silence and the faintest flicker of breath. They weren't rescuing a dog that day. They were uncovering something sacred. And what followed will test everything you believe about mercy, loyalty, and the quiet miracles God still sends. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you believe even the smallest life deserves a second chance, hit subscribe. This one will stay with you. Port Orford, Oregon, had the kind of silence that crept up on you. Not the eerie, horror movie kind, but the deep pulsing hush of wind through pines and waves that knew no end. That morning, the Pacific was restless, hurling itself again and again against the jagged rocks that jutted from the shore like broken teeth. A low mist hugged the cliffs, and sea spray hung in the air like static. It was 52 degrees and dropping. Cold enough to stiffen joints, cold enough for breath to show. Four Marines made their way down the bluff trail that skirted the coast, three in stride, one dragging his heels. Staff Sergeant Cole Maddox, 34, led the group with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need yelling. He was tall, lean, built like rope pulled taut. His face carried the wear of years spent in sand and smoke, weathered cheeks, faint lines etched around hard gray eyes that had seen too much too young. He moved like a man whose back had been broken once, because it had. A roadside IED in Helmand. He didn't talk about it. Cole was the kind of man who measured twice, cut once, and spoke only when it counted. The only visible softness about him was the leather cord he wore around his wrist, knotted with the dog tag of a German Shepherd K9 partner he had buried 4 years ago. Behind him came Ramirez, short and stocky, arms thick as telephone poles, skin-tanned copper under the Oregon cloud. He was 29, sarcastic to a fault, but loyal in the way only a Marine could be. He'd grown up in East LA, learned early how to fight and harder how to survive. Now, he carried a strange tenderness under all that bravado, the kind that showed up when nobody was watching. He was grumbling this morning, loudly. "I swear, I pulled morning duty 3 times this week," Ramirez muttered, kicking a wet stone down the trail. Next was Theo Lynn, the medic of the team, a wiry 26-year-old with sharp cheekbones and a sharper mind. His family ran a bakery in San Jose. He'd once wanted to be a doctor. Then 9/11s happened, and his plans shifted. He kept a field journal in his back pocket, scribbled with symptoms and diagnoses, but rarely talked unless it was urgent. Theo was quiet this morning, but his eyes missed nothing. Bo Kinney brought up the rear, tall and broad-shouldered, blonde hair always messy no matter the regulations. He was the youngest, barely 24, with the sun-damaged skin of a surfer and a grin that came too easy, except today. Today, his smile had been missing since the argument. The four of them had been bickering since 0500, mostly about who would lead the day's land nav drill. The argument had escalated enough that Cole, usually silent, had snapped. "Everyone shut up and move. If we're going to bicker like teenagers, we'll do it while walking." That had been an hour ago. Since then, silence. And that's when they heard it. A sound. It didn't belong to the surf or the wind. It was high-pitched, breathy, fading in and out like a ghost. Cole froze. "You hear that?" Ramirez stopped mid-step. "You mean the creepy whispering?" Theo raised his hand. "Shh." There. Again. This time it was clearer. A whimper. Faint, almost like wind caught in a bottle, but undeniably alive. They broke formation. Cole led them off the trail and toward the slope above the rocks. It was a narrow shelf of sand, covered in broken shells and driftwood, the kind of place seaweed tangled like forgotten hair. The whimper came again, closer now. And then Ramirez saw it. "Oh my God! Cole!" Just 10 feet ahead at the edge of a dune, something moved beneath the sand. Not much, just a twitch. The top of a head, no larger than a grapefruit, barely protruded from the clay-packed earth. A puppy. One swollen eye sealed shut, the other fluttering open, blinking through a crust of salt and dirt. Its fur was matted in gray clumps, wet and shaking. The muzzle was caked with grit. It didn't bark. It couldn't. It just made that broken, hopeless whimper again. "Jesus," Theo breathed. "She's buried." All four men dropped to their knees. Cole reached first, brushing sand away from the snout with care that surprised even him. "It's okay, girl. You're okay. We got you." No tag, no collar. Just a battered, broken German Shepherd puppy, maybe 10 weeks old, if that. She was barely more than bones and breath. Her nose flared shallowly, her body unmoving except for that twitching eye. Ramirez swore under his breath and started scooping clay with his bare hands. Theo followed. So did Bo. "Why the hell would someone do this?" Bo muttered, eyes wild. "She's just a baby." "She's still warm," Theo said. "That means she hasn't been here long. Maybe a few hours. Less if the wind didn't bury her." Cole's voice was steel. "No more talking. Dig." The sand was thick with clay beneath, packed hard from the night's mist. The deeper they went, the more their hands bled. Theo used the flat of his knife. Ramirez took off his shirt and scooped with it. Bo tore his sleeves and wrapped them around his palms. But the hole barely deepened. "I need leverage," Cole said. He slid both arms beneath the edges of the sand and tried to wedge upward without pressing the ribs. She stuck tight. "Like concrete," Bo added. His breath came ragged. "She's not even flinching." "She's shutting down," Theo said. "She's giving up." "No," Cole said. "Not on my watch." They kept digging. A rib cage appeared, then one paw, twisted, scraped raw. Bo's face contorted. "She tried to claw her way out." Ramirez's voice cracked. "Whoever did this, I swear—" "Later," Cole said. "Focus." Minutes passed. The sun climbed, but the mist stayed. Salt hung thick in the air. The only sound was the scraping of hands and the strained breathing of the four Marines. Finally, with one last pull, Cole lifted her free. Her legs hung limp. Her head lolled to the side. "Still breathing," Theo confirmed, "but barely." Cole didn't hesitate. He wrapped the puppy in Ramirez's torn shirt, pulled her close to his chest, and stood. "We're running," he said. "Get to the Jeep, now." The wind along the Oregon coast sharpened as the team broke into a sprint. Cole's boots slammed into wet sand. The bundled puppy cradled tight against his chest. Her head lolled weakly, the one open eye dull but blinking, barely. They hadn't gone 20 paces before Ramirez, just behind Cole, barked a hoarse shout that stopped them all mid-stride. Wait, look there!" His hand jutted out toward the left, to where the dune curved and sloped gently into a hollow. The sand there wasn't settled. It bulged unnaturally, like something had disturbed it from beneath. Ramirez dropped to his knees before anyone else could respond, digging with desperate hands. Then he froze. Two small heads, ears flattened, muzzles caked in clay, barely broke the surface. One was motionless. The other, a black and tan German Shepherd pup, no older than the first, let out a muffled whimper as a glob of wet sand slipped from its nose. "God help me!" Ramirez choked. "There's more!" Theo knelt beside him instantly, his slim fingers brushing sand like a surgeon working in the dark. "Same breed. Probably from the same litter," he said. "Ramirez, stay on the left. Bo, start from the side. We don't know how deep they are." Bo's eyes widened, but he obeyed without question, hands flying to the task. Cole turned, still holding the first pup, torn between running her to safety or staying. His feet didn't move. That one eye, drenched in grime but somehow still filled with life, looked up at him like it remembered him already. A tether invisible and real. He knelt down, one arm still holding the limp pup against his ribs. "Theo," he said, voice tight, "how long could they survive like this?" Theo didn't look up. "Depends. Cold helps, slows their metabolism, but if the chest is compressed, they can suffocate in minutes. We might already be too late." Ramirez hissed a curse and dug faster, even as a gash split open on his knuckle, blood soaked into sand. Cole made his decision. "Bo," he said sharply, "take her." And he passed the bundled puppy into Bo's arms with a gentleness that didn't match the urgency around them. "Get to the truck. You remember where we parked?" Bo's voice cracked. "Half-mile north, off the trailhead. Drive. Leave the engine running. Don't stop for anything." Bo clutched the small bundle like a relic. "Yes, Staff Sergeant," he said, already backing up the slope. Ramirez and Theo were elbow-deep in the earth now. One pup had begun to tremble, the slightest shake in its back legs. The other still hadn't moved. Ramirez leaned in close. "Come on, baby. Breathe." The earth wasn't cooperating. It was dense, clumpy, held together by damp sea clay. Every handful removed seemed to be replaced by collapse from the sides. Cole grabbed Theo's pack and rifled through it. "Where's that entrenching tool?" "Left pocket," Theo said, not pausing. Cole snapped it open, a collapsible shovel, military-issued, jagged at the edge, and began to dig with controlled fury. Every scoop exposed more fur, more delicate limbs, more of the grotesque scene they'd stumbled into. Ramirez shifted and found the edge of something hard, a garbage bag. He froze. "There's a bag here, big, tied shut." Cole's shovel paused mid-swing. "What?" "Bag's right under this one's ribs," Ramirez said, brushing it carefully. "Heavy. And damn it, there's something inside." Theo's eyes darted up. Could be food waste, or... He didn't finish the thought. "Leave it," Cole snapped. "Dogs first." They got the first pup out. It was alive, but just barely. Its legs moved feebly, like a wind-up toy at the end of its key. Theo pulled off his overshirt and wrapped it snugly around the tiny body. The second pup, the still one, took longer. When Cole finally dug out the last of the packed-in sand around her chest, Theo laid his fingers along the rib cage. "No breath," he said softly. "No movement." Ramirez's face collapsed. "No, no, no." He leaned in, started rubbing its chest with 2 fingers. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't leave your brother and sister." "Pulse?" Cole asked. "Faint, but there." Theo reached into his medical pouch and pulled out a tiny plastic syringe, an oral hydration tool he used in desert drills. He dipped it into his canteen, filled it, and let one drop hit the pup's tongue. A twitch, then another. "She's still here," Theo breathed. "We can do this!" Behind them, a voice called out. A woman's voice, firm and low. "Hey, Marines?" They turned to see Dr. Sarah Lane hustling down the bluff trail. She was in her late 40s, tall, wiry, with strong arms and a face that had seen every ugly side of life and hadn't turned away once. Her hair, dark and streaked with gray, was pulled into a no-nonsense braid under a knit cap. She wore jeans, a field jacket, and a utility bag slung across her chest. A stethoscope swung as she moved. She was the town's only veterinarian and former Army field medic, a fact well known in Port Orford. "You called in an emergency?" she asked, already crouching. Cole nodded. 3 German Shepherd pups, all buried. One's in the truck already. 2 more here. Sarah's eyes scanned the scene with sharp precision. "Get them wrapped. Keep pressure off their ribs. Cole's your friend right now, but we'll need to get them warm soon." As she examined the weakest pup, she didn't hesitate. "She's critical. We need fluids, heat, and oxygen, now." "We've got a truck," Cole said. "Bo's waiting." "Good," she replied. "You boys carry. I'll clear space in my clinic. It's 5 minutes if we don't stop." Cole gathered the limp pup against his chest again. Ramirez took the stronger of the 2. Theo carried supplies. Sarah led the way. As they climbed back up the slope, Ramirez looked over at Cole. "You were gonna leave," he said. Not accusatory, just curious. Cole's jaw worked. "I thought about it," he said. "I saw her eye. I couldn't." They reached the top and saw Bo's truck, a beat-up green military utility vehicle, parked with the engine rumbling. The back seat was filled with towels, jackets, anything they had soft. Bo was in the front, white-faced, watching the road. Sarah opened the passenger door. "Stack 'em! I'll ride in the back. Go!" The truck roared into motion. The truck's engine groaned under the strain of the terrain, tires skidding across gravel and mud as Bo navigated through the winding coastal road. Sarah Lane sat in the back seat, bracing herself with one arm while cradling the weakest of the 3 puppies with the other, her voice steady despite the jostling. Ramirez and Theo squeezed beside her, each with a pup tucked inside their jackets. Cole rode up front in silence, his eyes locked on the wet, fog-blurred windshield. Every muscle in his jaw clenched. Bo's hands gripped the wheel tighter than he needed to. His knuckles were white, but it wasn't the driving that made them ache. It was the memory. A searing, unwelcome flash of another life, another road, another time. He had once held someone like that too. His best friend, Private Lewis Carver, after a mortar strike outside of Sanguine. The way Carver's body had gone limp in Bo's lap still haunted his sleep. But today wasn't about watching someone die. Today was about fighting like hell to make sure no one did. The smallest pup, the one Theo had nearly pronounced lost, let out the tiniest sound as Sarah adjusted her position. A breath, thin and raspy, but there. Sarah's eyes flicked down. "Still with us?" she said, softly but clearly. Theo leaned in. "Let me check her gums." He peeled back the tiny dog's lip and frowned. "Pale, she's crashing." "I've got glucose gel," Sarah replied, shifting her bag with one knee and retrieving a small tube. She was efficient and calm, moving like someone who had seen panic 1,000 times, but never allowed it to own her. She dabbed a drop onto her finger and gently smeared it along the pup's tongue. "Just a little, sweetheart. Come on." Sarah Lane wasn't a stranger to emergencies. She had served 2 tours in Iraq as a field medic before retiring and becoming a veterinarian. At 48, she had the wiry build of someone who rarely sat down and the kind of sharp gaze that didn't miss much. Her experience in combat had left its scars, but none visible. What remained was a relentless focus and a stubborn refusal to give up on anything that still had breath in its lungs. Cole glanced back, watching Sarah work. "How bad is she?" Sarah met his eyes. "We've got minutes. Maybe." The words hit harder than a bullet. "Hang on, Nina," Bo murmured. He had named the tiny pup on the drive without even realizing it. It just came out. Nina. It meant little girl in his grandmother's Spanish, and for some reason, it fit. Ahead, the outline of a weather-worn wooden sign emerged from the fog. Port Orford Animal Wellness Center. The building beyond it was a low square structure with faded red siding and a wraparound porch, tucked behind a gas station and half buried in coastal mist. "We're here," Bo announced. He barely brought the truck to a full stop before they jumped out. Sarah pushed open the rear door and barked over her shoulder. "Room 1, back left. Cole, get the generator going. Theo, warm fluids. Ramirez, towels and heat pads. Closet in the hall." They moved like a unit, falling into roles without needing more than that. The clinic was silent, save for the buzzing of an old refrigerator and the hollow echoes of hurried boots. The inside smelled faintly of antiseptic and cedar. Posters of happy kittens and grinning dogs adorned the pale green walls. The irony wasn't lost on Cole as he passed one that said, "Every life matters." In room 1, Sarah had laid Nina on the exam table, the smallest pup looking even more fragile under the harsh overhead lights. Her limbs were stiff. Her fur, still crusted with clay, was patchy in places, revealing bruised skin underneath. The glucose hadn't done much. Theo returned with an IV line and a bag of warmed saline. Sarah didn't wait. She shaved a tiny patch on Nina's leg and inserted the catheter with practiced hands. "Hang the bag. Slow drip. Let's not shock her system." Ramirez and Bo returned with armfuls of towels, a heating pad, and a space heater that looked like it hadn't been used since the 90s. "Plug it in," Sarah said, not looking up. They worked for what felt like hours. In reality, it was maybe 20 minutes. Scout, the largest of the pups, had perked up slightly and was now asleep in Theo's lap. Echo, the middle one, had started whining softly and trying to shift, though her back legs still twitched oddly. But Nina wasn't moving. Bo stood in the doorway, unmoving. His face was blank, but his fingers were locked around the doorframe. "She's strong," Sarah said, without turning. "She held on in that hole long enough for you to find her. Don't count her out yet." Bo didn't speak. His throat was too tight. The war had taken much from him, and grief was a language he spoke fluently. But today he refused. He stepped forward, crouched beside the table. His large hand hovered for a moment, then gently rested on the heating pad next to her. "She deserves better," he said, voice hoarse. "She deserves to live." "She's trying," Sarah replied quietly. Cole stood outside the door, arms crossed, one shoulder against the wall. He wasn't a man prone to displays, but he kept looking through the glass pane like watching was the only thing anchoring him. The clock ticked. Then, like a whisper, Nina coughed. Not loud, not strong, but unmistakable. Theo was the first to move. "There it is," he said, grabbing his stethoscope. Sarah smiled, barely. "Heartbeat stabilizing. It's faint, but it's real." Bo didn't breathe until Nina did again. The tiny pup gave a feeble shudder, then the smallest sigh. Her eye, the one not crusted shut, fluttered open just a sliver, and looked right at him. Bo broke. Not loudly, not messily, but a single tear traced its way down his cheek, carving a path through the dried salt and sand still clinging to his skin. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered. "Not this time." Sarah looked up, her expression unreadable. "She's not out of the woods yet," she warned, but Bo just nodded. "Then we stand watch." The sun had begun its quiet descent behind the gray veil of clouds blanketing Port Orford. A wet wind slid in from the sea, cold and steady, rustling the flags atop the old Coast Guard station and rattling the loose screen on the veterinary clinic's porch door. Inside the Port Orford Animal Wellness Center, the dimming light filtered through salt-smudged windows, casting long, sleepy shadows across tile floors scrubbed raw by years of use. Theo Lynn sat on a hard bench just outside exam room 1, elbows on knees, hands folded together so tightly his knuckles were white. He hadn't said much since they'd arrived. His medical training told him what was happening beyond that door. He'd helped administer IV lines, adjust the heating pads, even check the pup's vitals alongside Dr. Lane. But now that his hands were idle, the weight of everything hit him in full. At 26, Theo was still the youngest in the unit. He wore his age in the careful way he moved, always controlled, always second-guessing before speaking. Slender with short black hair and smooth skin that still hadn't seen the same combat sun as Cole or Ramirez, Theo often seemed more professor than Marine. But in those quiet moments, like this one, his eyes told a different story. Eyes that had watched friends break, watched strangers die, eyes too old for his clean face. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small folded photograph, creased from years of unfolding, corners soft. It showed a chubby boy, maybe 5, clinging to a golden retriever with a lopsided grin and one torn ear. The dog's name had been Scout, named after the same kind of dog his team had just pulled from a shallow grave of clay and seaweed. His mother had taken the photo in their small backyard in San Jose before his father left for good. Scout had died the winter Theo enlisted. He ran a thumb over the image, then pressed it to his chest and closed his eyes. "Please," he whispered silently, "just let them make it." Down the hall, inside the main room of the clinic, the atmosphere was thick with tension and antiseptic. Dr. Sarah Lane, her brown braid pulled tight against the collar of her jacket, was moving like a metronome between the 3 pups laid out on separate makeshift beds, 2 steel tables, and a warmed blanket-topped storage crate pressed into service. Scout, the largest pup, was responding well. He'd begun licking at a shallow dish of water and shifted his weight uncomfortably, but willingly. Echo had her eyes open and followed movement across the room with a tilt of her head. Nina was still curled in on herself, silent, her ribcage fluttering like moth wings. Sarah had removed the worst of the matted clay from Nina's ears and hindquarters, revealing pale pink skin underneath. The saline drip continued slowly into the catheter in her leg. She adjusted the heat lamp and laid a fresh towel over the pup's lower body. Her expression was unreadable, lips pressed into a tight line. "Her temperature's coming up," she muttered to no one in particular, "but her blood pressure's still low. That eye—" She paused, gently lifting the swollen lid. "We may not be able to save it, but we can save her." Cole stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed, watching everything in silence. He hadn't left his post since arriving. The overhead fluorescent lighting drew sharp lines across his face, highlighting every crease, every bruise forming along his knuckles. He hadn't even taken off his field jacket. Ramirez, sitting on a small stool near Echo, looked up. "What are you thinking, boss?" Cole shook his head. "Thinking we almost didn't take the low trail this morning. If we hadn't—" Ramirez let the thought die. "But we did." Bo entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of coffee from the gas station across the road. The scent of burnt roast and too much powdered creamer filled the air. "Coffee?" he offered, holding one out to Sarah. "Nah." She gave him a nod of thanks and took it without breaking stride. "It's terrible," she said after a sip. "I know. Good. I like terrible coffee." Bo gave a tired smile and walked over to Cole, offering the second mug. Cole accepted with a grunt and a nod, never taking his eyes off Nina. They stood in silence, listening to the beeps from the vital monitor, clipped to Nina's IV line, the low hum of the portable heater, and the occasional creak of the old building settling around them. The day was dying outside, but here, inside this worn little room, the fight to keep 3 small lives alive hadn't ended. Then, softly, the door creaked open behind them. Theo stepped in, eyes red, photo still in hand. He didn't speak, just moved over to Nina's table, his gaze locking on the tiny dog with a kind of quiet desperation. Sarah noticed and stepped back. "You want to check her again?" she asked. Theo nodded. He set the photo down beside Nina and leaned over her, stethoscope already uncoiling from around his neck. He pressed it gently to her chest, brow furrowing as he listened. After a long beat, he straightened. "Stronger than before?" Sarah gave a small smile. "Told you she's a fighter." Cole approached, looking down at the photograph. "She yours?" he asked. Theo nodded. "Long time ago. Lost her the week I shipped out." He paused, brushing Nina's fur with 2 fingers. "Didn't think I'd ever see another like her." Cole didn't say anything, just placed a hand on Theo's shoulder. Ramirez looked away, pretending to check Echo's bandages. Bo adjusted Scout's heating pad and mumbled something about getting more towels, though no one asked him to. The air shifted, not brighter exactly, but steadier. Outside, the last light began to fade behind the trees. Inside, the clinic's warmth now pulsed gently around the small bodies that still clung to life. For the first time since they had been found, all 3 puppies were breathing rhythmically. None had cried. None had barked. But they were alive. That was enough. Outside the Port Orford Animal Wellness Center, the night had settled deep and still. The town was silent, save for the rhythmic hissing of wind through the cypress trees and the distant wash of waves against the jetty. A low fog blanketed the coastline, softening the edges of the world. And under its gray veil, the lights from the clinic glowed warm and unwavering. Inside, time seemed to slow, stretching across the dim corridors and quiet rooms like a held breath. The Marines hadn't left. Not one of them had spoken the words, but they all knew they were staying through the night. Sarah Lane had offered blankets and coffee. They refused the blankets and took the coffee, now lukewarm and bitter but comforting in its presence. She understood. She'd done her own silent vigils before, back when she wore a different uniform, and had held pressure to wounds she couldn't close. Now, as a veterinarian in a small coastal town, her patience had changed, but the weight of responsibility had not. She had gone home just past midnight to rest for a few hours, promising to return before sunrise. She lived nearby in a modest blue cottage behind a weather-beaten fence and always kept her porch light on, even when she slept, just in case someone, 2-legged or 4, needed to find their way. In the front room of the clinic, Cole sat cross-legged against the wall near the heater, his eyes fixed on Nina. The pup lay curled on a heated pad wrapped in towels, a soft fleece blanket covering most of her body. Her breathing had steadied some, but her movements remained limited. She hadn't barked, hadn't whined, just those faint rises of her chest that the team counted like sacred rhythm. It was Bo who broke the silence first, seated across the room, back resting against the base of a supply cabinet. "She's got a name now," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the heater. "Nina. That's what I called her earlier. I think it stuck." Cole didn't look away from the pup. "Nina," he repeated, like trying the word on for meaning. "Fits her. Small, but fierce." Bo nodded. "She made it this far. That's not nothing." Ramirez was lying flat on his back on the linoleum floor, one arm draped over his eyes. Hell of a name for a dog who fought out of a grave. Theo sat at the reception desk, flipping pages in a veterinary reference guide he wasn't reading. He glanced up. "What about the other 2? The second pup, slightly larger, more energetic, was now resting comfortably in a crate lined with flannel. Her ears were oversized for her head, constantly twitching at every sound, and she had a sharp, curious look in her brown eyes. When Theo had bent over earlier to check on her, she'd tilted her head and let out a single melodic yip. "Echo," Theo said now. "She repeats everything. Sounds, movement, energy. She mirrors it back." Ramirez snorted softly. "Sounds like you, Doc." Theo shrugged. "She just seems like an echo." Cole finally leaned back from Nina and nodded toward the last of the pups, the broadest and sturdiest of the 3, now snoring gently with one paw twitching in a dream. His fur was darker than the others, thick with streaks of black and chestnut, and even asleep, his body seemed braced, like a sentinel always ready. Ramirez spoke without hesitation. "That one's Scout." "Why Scout?" Bo asked. Because he's always first to move, first to eat, first to sniff a new sound, just like a forward recon. Ramirez cracked one eye open. Besides, he looks like he'd jump between you and a bear without a second thought. They all looked at the sleeping pup, and no one argued. So it was decided. The nameless were named Scout, the brave, Echo, the curious, and Nina, the fragile fighter. Outside, the fog thickened, curling against the clinic's windows like a tide looking for cracks. Inside, warmth held fast. The four Marines didn't speak for a long time. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was reverent, as if they were bearing witness to something sacred. A little before 3 a.m., Cole stood and stretched his arms until his shoulders popped. He stepped toward Nina and crouched beside her again. Her one open eye blinked slowly, then closed again. He extended a hand, hesitantly, palm open beside her nose. She didn't move for a moment. Then, as if from memory, or instinct, or gratitude deeper than words, her tiny pink tongue emerged, dry and delicate, and touched the edge of his hand. Cole froze. It wasn't much, just a lick, barely a second. But it stopped the world. Ramirez sat upright. Bo leaned forward. Theo stood from his chair. None of them said anything, but they saw it. Cole lowered his head, pressing his forehead gently against the towel where Nina lay. His shoulders trembled, just once. When he lifted his face, his eyes shimmered in the faint light. But he didn't wipe the tears. He let them fall freely down his cheeks. "She's in there," he whispered. "She's still fighting." Bo exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. Theo nodded slowly. Ramirez looked away and rubbed his face with both hands. It wasn't the kind of moment Marines usually acknowledged, but none of them moved to downplay it. Time passed. One by one, they took turns sitting beside the three pups. Bo hummed a lullaby his grandmother used to sing. Theo wrote their vitals down in a notebook and taped it to the wall beside each crate. Ramirez cleaned the counters and rearranged the supply shelves, mumbling curses at the disorganized labeling. Cole stayed mostly by Nina's side. By the time the first pale blue of dawn touched the horizon, their names had already settled in like roots. Three pups who had no reason to survive. Three Marines who had every reason to walk away. But none of them had. 4 days had passed since the rescue. The clinic, which had once echoed only with the sterile hum of machines and the sharp bark of urgency, had taken on a different rhythm now, quiet, steady, and filled with small miracles. Each morning the Marines arrived early, staying long past any reasonable hour. Dr. Sarah Lane had given up trying to send them home. Instead, she left them a key to the side door and cleared out the clinic's back room for them to rest when they needed to. But most nights, they didn't use it. They preferred to sleep in shifts on folding chairs or directly on the floor beside the pups' crates. Sarah watched all of this with a kind of guarded admiration. She wasn't one for sentiment, not anymore. Not since the night she lost her younger brother to a drunk driver while she was deployed overseas. Since then, she had learned that grief makes the world smaller, colder. But these men, these tiny dogs, they were beginning to carve space into that coldness. The clinic had become a place of slow recovery, not just for the animals, but for the men who found them. Scout, the largest pup, was already living up to his name. That morning he had made it all the way from his crate to the front office by himself, stopping only once to bark at his own reflection in the stainless steel trash can. His fur was thickening, his muscles filling out, and he had taken a special interest in chewing the edge of Ramirez's bootlace whenever he stood still too long. Echo was smaller, but no less determined. Her legs still wobbled, especially when she tried to turn quickly. But she had a strange sort of grace to her gait, more like a skip than a step. She followed voices, always watching, always alert. When Theo spoke, even softly, she moved closer, ears perked like satellite dishes. Nina was still struggling. Cole had built her a small platform using salvaged wood, old crates, and military-grade aluminum strips. It wasn't pretty, but it was stable, about 3 feet long and a foot high, with gentle sloped ramps on either side and a soft mat across the top. Every morning he lifted her gently onto it, kneeling beside her, steadying her tiny legs beneath her fragile frame. She had yet to stand unaided, but each morning she tried. Her eyes, still a little cloudy on the left side, were sharp with intent now. She didn't look away when Cole spoke. She didn't flinch when his hands approached. She simply stared at him like she recognized something there, something steady. "Weight forward," he murmured that morning, his fingers just behind her ribs. "Front paws flat. You're okay." Nina shifted, her paws spreading slightly, her hind legs dragging behind like loose ropes. Then she slumped back down with a frustrated whine. "That's still progress," Bo said from across the room. He was sweeping hair and sawdust into a neat pile. "Yesterday she didn't even lift her front paws." "She'll get there," Theo added, glancing up from the meds log he was updating. "She's stubborn." "She's a Marine," Cole said under his breath, brushing his hand across Nina's back. Ramirez, who had disappeared into town earlier that morning, chose that moment to return. He pushed through the front door without a word, carrying a small brown paper bag from the Port Orford General Store. "You know it's Sunday, right?" Bo asked. "Store barely opens on Sundays." "They opened for me," Ramirez said flatly. He walked straight over to Nina, crouched beside her, and from the bag pulled out a tiny, soft blue knit sweater. It was handmade, clearly stitched by someone who cared about warmth more than fashion. Ramirez fumbled slightly as he pulled it over Nina's head and carefully slid her front paws through the sleeves. "There," he said. "Now she's got gear." The others stared. "You bought her a sweater?" Theo asked, one brow raised. "She's a soldier," Ramirez muttered, pulling the sweater snug over her tiny shoulders. "And a cold soldier is a useless one." Bo laughed out loud. "That might be the softest thing I've ever seen you do." "Shut it." But even Cole smiled, just barely, as he adjusted the fit of the sweater over Nina's thin back. It hung loose at the belly, but clung just enough to keep her warm. "Thanks," Cole said quietly. Ramirez only shrugged and walked back toward the door. "Coffee's still terrible here. I'm going for a refill." Nina, now dressed like a tiny soldier ready for fall weather, blinked slowly up at Cole. Then, with a grunt of effort, she pressed her front legs down, pulling her chest slightly off the mat. She didn't hold it long, only a second, maybe two, but it was the highest she'd lifted herself all week. Cole didn't move. "That's it," he said softly. "That's how we win." Theo scribbled something in his notebook. Bo looked up. "What's that?" Theo held it up. Day 4. Nina lifted front chest on platform, wearing sweater. Possible correlation? Blue equal sign power. He grinned. "Might be a placebo, but I'll take it." As the day wore on, the clinic welcomed an unexpected visitor, a tall woman in her early 60s with silver blonde hair and a thick braid and sharp green eyes. Her name was Mrs. Marta Haywood, and she ran the Port Orford Knitting Circle, a group of 6 retirees who gathered every Thursday in the community center to knit for animal shelters and new mothers. She had heard, through the grapevine of the small-town rumor mill, that a group of Marines had rescued a litter of buried puppies. "I knit this for the others," she said matter-of-factly, pulling 3 more tiny sweaters from her oversized canvas bag. Each one was different. One deep red, one mustard yellow, one forest green. "They'll outgrow them in a week," she added, "but everyone deserves a little comfort." She handed them over, nodded once, then left without waiting for thanks. Bo stared after her. "That woman is terrifying." "She's also my landlord," Sarah said, having returned not long before. "And she once beat a city councilman with a broom over a parking space. Don't cross her." By evening, all 3 pups had their sweaters on. Scout's fit best. Echo kept trying to pull hers off, playfully gnawing at the sleeve. Nina just lay there, blinking at them all, the blue wool framing her tiny frame like armor. And for the first time, she lifted her front completely off the platform, held it, then collapsed in Cole's lap. He didn't say anything, just laid a hand on her back and let it stay there. The 10th morning broke clean in gold, like someone had scrubbed the fog from the sky overnight. It was the kind of crisp, wind-salted day that reminded Cole of early drills on the East Coast. Seagulls high above, the scent of pine mixing with brine, and the light sharp enough to make shadows feel honest. The ocean wasn't angry today. It moved like it was breathing deep, slow breaths, heaving and curling against the sand, rolling itself back into rhythm. The Marines stood at the edge of the parking turnout, just north of Port Orford's lesser-known cove, the place where it had all begun. The same place they had found a buried whimper in the sand 10 days ago. But today, they hadn't come to rescue. Today, they came to return. Cole stood in his usual place at the front, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the slope like it might shift again. Beside him, Scout tugged against his leash, sniffing the wind. The pup had grown rapidly in just over a week. His coat darker now, gait stronger, tail held like he had a purpose. Bo had made him a new collar from braided paracord, with a metal tag that read Scout in etched block letters. Behind them, Echo danced in circles, whining with excitement. She wore her green sweater, slightly frayed at the edges from her insistence on chewing it. Ramirez held her leash loosely, allowing just enough slack for her to bounce between footprints in the sand. Her eyes darted at everything, birds, wind, water, like she wanted to memorize the entire coast. And then there was Nina. She wore her blue sweater again, now slightly tighter around her belly. Her gait was uneven, her back legs still unsure, but she walked, her own forepaws pressing into the cool sand for the first time since the burial. She moved slowly with the kind of effort that made each step feel sacred. Cole had looped her leash loosely around his wrist, but he wasn't guiding her. She was leading him. Theo walked behind, holding a small canvas bag over his shoulder and carrying something wrapped in cloth. Sarah had joined them too, though she stood back from the trail's edge. She wore her field jacket zipped up to the chin, her arms crossed tight beneath it. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes never left the dogs. The group descended the slope quietly. No one spoke. Though Echo yipped once at a crab skittering across a tide pool, they passed the same outcropping of rock. Cole remembered seeing when he first knelt in the sand and unearthed Nina's head. It was still jagged, still wet from salt spray, but now it held no weight, just stone. When they reached the flat stretch of beach where it had happened, the men paused. Cole exhaled. "This is the spot." Bo looked around. "Looks different now." "Doesn't smell like rot anymore," Ramirez added. Theo nodded. "Because it isn't death anymore." They stood in silence for a long beat. Nina, breathing slightly harder, stepped forward. Her back legs shook, but she didn't collapse. She planted her front paws into the sand and moved one back leg, then the other. 3 full steps before she stopped, stared up at Cole, and gave a soft, wheezing whine. Cole dropped to one knee beside her, lowering his forehead gently to hers. "You did it," he whispered. "You came back." Bo pulled the cloth-wrapped object from Theo's bag. Inside was a small wooden post, hand-sanded from an old crate, about 2 feet tall, with a pointed end sharpened just enough to drive into sand. Ramirez produced a small hammer from his back pocket. "What's it say again?" Theo asked. Bo recited the line, not reading it, just knowing. This was where death began, now it's where life restarted. They planted it together, a few feet from the tide line. Cole drove it in with 2 solid strikes. The post stood crooked, weathered, and perfect. Scout barked once. Echo sprinted in an awkward zigzag, chasing after a gull that had the nerve to land too close. Nina sat beside the post, her legs folded under her like she'd chosen this place, like she knew. Sarah approached, stopping beside Cole. She looked down at Nina, then at the wooden marker. "I've buried animals here," she said softly, "before you boys ever arrived. Sick ones. Abandoned ones I couldn't save. But I've never come back to any of their graves." She paused, then added, "Maybe I should have." Cole looked at her, brow furrowed. She shrugged, as if to brush away the thought. "Places don't have to stay what they were." He nodded once. "Neither do people." Bo and Ramirez began setting out a small lunch, the marine version of a picnic. Jerky, peanut butter packets, and lukewarm black coffee from a thermos. The dog sniffed eagerly, circling. Cole sat in the sand beside Nina, who pressed into his side. Her body trembled, but she stayed upright, eyes fixed on the water. Theo squatted beside Echo, who had stopped her galloping to sit on his boot. "You think they remember?" he asked. Cole glanced at him. "Not how we do, but they know, in their own way." Sarah tilted her head toward the surf. "Animals don't need to remember to heal. They just need a place to begin again." They stayed on the beach until the sun slipped behind the distant clouds, and the shadows of the cliffs began to stretch like reaching arms. None of them wanted to be the first to leave. When they finally packed up, Cole lingered, looking once more at the post they'd left in the sand. Scout bumped into his leg. Echo yipped at a falling leaf. Nina took one more step forward on her own and didn't fall. And for the first time in 10 days, Cole let himself believe. Not just that they had saved these dogs, but that something in himself had been saved too. By the third week, Port Orford had come to know the story. At the post office, folks whispered about the buried puppies rescued by Marines. At the bait shop, old fishermen spoke of it like legend. And at the Port Orford Community Center, a laminated flyer hung on the bulletin board with a photo of Scout, Echo, and Nina curled up in matching sweaters under the words, "From buried to brave, service dog training, accepting candidates now." It had been left by Marla Green, the regional coordinator for the Veteran Companion Initiative, a nonprofit that paired trained rescue dogs with veterans suffering from PTSD, depression, or physical injuries. Marla was in her early 50s, with salt and pepper dreadlocks tied back in a red scarf and a wide, calming presence that filled the space around her. She spoke with deliberate warmth, the kind that made people listen. A former Army medic and counselor, she'd been running the Oregon Outreach Program for 6 years and had helped pair over 200 dogs with vets across the state. When she heard Sarah's voicemail about the 3 German Shepherd pups and their rescuers, she drove 4 hours from Eugene and arrived with a clipboard and questions. She watched Nina hobble through the back hallway of the clinic with one eye squinting into the light and said simply, "She's got it, they all do." So it began. The training took place at Windcrest Ranch, a quiet, windswept facility about 15 minutes inland. Open pastures rolled out behind cedar barns, and a line of flags flapped gently in the breeze near the main office. The program usually ran for 8 weeks, but Sarah vouched for the pups' emotional resilience and the Marines' commitment, so they were invited for accelerated orientation. Each man was paired with the dog he'd naturally bonded with, Bo with Scout, Theo with Echo, and Cole, of course, with Nina. The first day was chaos. Scout tried to climb onto every bench and table in sight. Echo barked at her own shadow. Nina froze halfway through the front gate, trembling at the wide openness of the field. Cole didn't push her. He simply knelt and waited, his palm resting lightly on the grass until she made the decision to move. She did. Slowly. But she did. Veterans of every age came to the ranch daily, some in wheelchairs, others with canes or prosthetic legs. A few barely spoke. One of them was James "Jimmy" Harlow, a tall, broad man in his late 40s with shoulders that had once been powerful but now slumped as if carrying invisible weight. He had a long beard, quiet eyes, and a silence that never left his side. According to Marla, Jimmy hadn't said more than a few words to anyone in 5 years. Not since returning from his 3rd deployment in Afghanistan. On the 4th day, Nina wandered toward him. She didn't bark or wag her tail. She simply sat down beside his wheelchair, leaned gently against his leg, and stayed there. Jimmy looked down. He didn't move. Not at first. Then his hand, heavy and hesitant, lowered and touched the fur between her ears. Just a light press, but it stayed. And he cried. Not loudly, not messily. Just quiet, cracked sobs that had waited too long to find their way out. Marla witnessed it and later pulled Cole aside. "Do you know what that means?" she asked. Cole nodded. "Yeah," he said, voice quiet. "It means she's already doing the job." By week's end, Nina had become the smallest celebrity of Windcrest. Her one working eye held steady contact with anyone she approached. She never jumped, never demanded. She simply arrived, like gravity, and sat with you until the world felt quieter. Sarah visited on the 6th day, watching from the sidelines as Scout led Bo through an obstacle course, tail high like a banner. Echo performed a stay drill beside Theo while wagging nonstop. And Nina? She was curled at the feet of a young woman with burn scars across her neck, letting the woman gently brush her fur. At the closing ceremony held in the barn, each Marine stood with his pup as Marla announced the pairings. It was a quiet event. No applause, just nods and proud smiles under the wide wooden rafters. Afterward, Sarah found Cole outside near the fence line. He was watching the sky turn that strange blue it only became just before dusk. Nina was sitting beside him, pressed close like she always did. Sarah walked over, hands in her jacket pockets. "You did good with her," she said. Cole didn't answer right away. His eyes were distant, thoughtful. She sat beside him on the fence rail, the wood creaking beneath her. "Marla asked me something," she said after a moment. "Said there's a vet in Montana who's a good fit for Nina. PTSD. Isolated. Could really use a dog like her. Cole nodded slowly. So? Sarah prompted. He looked down at Nina. Her ear twitched. I told her no, he said finally. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You sure? She needs someone steady, he said. Someone who sees her the way she is, not what's broken. And maybe I need that too. Sarah gave a small smile. You sound like someone who's found his new orders. Cole chuckled just once. Maybe I have. That night, back in town, they gathered in the clinic one last time. The crates were folded, the meds logged and sealed. Scout lay sprawled across Beau's boots, snoring like a log. Echo had somehow found her way onto Theo's lap and refused to move. And Nina? Nina sat curled on a worn blanket near the center of the room, her blue sweater now slightly stretched, her good eye half closed in peace. Marla returned briefly to deliver final documents. Ownership papers, vet records, service certifications. Ramirez signed Scouts without blinking. Theo ran a thumb over Echo's name before he signed his. Cole stared at Nina's file a little longer. Then he signed. Sarah watched quietly from the hallway. You keeping her? She asked as he handed the papers back. He looked at her. No, he said, then glanced down at the sleeping dog at his feet. She's keeping me. They left the clinic together, dogs, men, and something like a family. The world hadn't changed, but they had. Sometimes, the greatest miracles begin in the quietest places, a forgotten beach, a trembling breath, a single step forward. Nina was never supposed to survive. Scout and Echo were never meant to be found. And yet, through the hands of those who refused to look away, they rose. This story isn't just about rescue, it's about redemption. About how brokenness is not the end, but often the beginning of something holy. In the hands of grace, even what's buried in silence can be brought back to life. Maybe you felt like Nina, overlooked, worn down, struggling to stand. Or maybe you've been like Cole, trying to be strong while carrying a weight no one else can see. Wherever you are, know this. God sees you. He hasn't forgotten you. Sometimes his miracles arrive in the form of muddy paw prints, ragged blue sweaters, and unexpected second chances. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope. Comment amen if you believe in second chances. Subscribe to the channel to stand with us in telling stories of healing, faith, and quiet miracles. And may God bless every heart that watched to the end. Let's keep spreading light, one story, one soul at a time.